Three, two, one, here we go. Rainman's Take podcast. Observations on the world we live in. My take on current events and other topics of interest. Also, interviews with some really cool people. So let's get the conversation going. Hey everybody, it's the Rain Man. Today we've got a very interesting episode. Lots of things to think about. But before I get into the episode today, I want to just let you all know that I'm very excited because today is episode number 100 for Rain Man's Take. So if you have been part of Rain Man's Take for any length of time, thank you very much. If you're new to the channel, I welcome and I know you're going to love the content. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button, which you're going to find at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And if you could watch this to the end, because that will help me with the YouTube algorithm so that we can actually generate more views for this for the show and get the word out and get the conversation going. So really appreciate it. Thank you very much for being part of Rain Man's Take. So with that being said, I want to talk today about a comment a friend of mine made recently. He basically said to me, he said, Brian, I never thought it would get this bad in the United States. And I found that very interesting. But here's a little bit of context around that. Ben is my friend who made the comment. We were discussing how far the government of the United States has gone in their attempts to control the narrative and as a result, the U.S. population, and just how life here doesn't feel as free anymore. What makes this comment interesting is Ben came to the United States as a boy in the 80s as part of the massive wave of Vietnamese boat people refugees escaping war-ravaged Vietnam. If you don't know anything about this period of time, I highly recommend you look into it, as it was unbelievable what these boat voyages were like just to escape the communists and get a taste of freedom. Once Ben finally made it to the United States, he was first relocated to Oklahoma and eventually made his way to San Diego, where he now owns 2 automotive repair shops. He is literally the American dream personified. Came here with nothing, worked hard, utilized his skills and his work ethic and entrepreneurial spirit to make something that he is now able to pass on to his adult son. Ben is a typical first-generation immigrant refugee. His English isn't the best, but his son is 100% American and will make his father proud someday. So let me give you a little history about why he left Vietnam in the first place. The South, having been aligned with the United States, was quote unquote assimilated into the North to become the People's Republic of Vietnam. And quoting from just 2 articles, I'll give you a few examples of what became of the South and the whole country. So reading from the first article here, the article is called What Was Left Behind After America Withdrew from Vietnam. And it was by Anh Tran Tram Vo. And I found this on the Texas Women's University website. And I'll just read directly from the article here. Quoting, eventually the American combat troops withdrew from the South and signed the Paris Peace Accords, which resulted in 2 separate governments in Vietnam. According to the document, leaders from both political systems agreed to respect the other and promised not to use force to unify Vietnam. While the Southerners expected to start a new life in peace, the Northern government broke the agreement. The communists finally took over the South's government and reunified the country as the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. Under the Act of Post-War Economic Recovery, the authority took away the property of the rich and shared them with the poor, discriminated against the civilians and officers of the old government, and awarded jobs for people who supported the North during the war. Now, this is just me saying this right now. That doesn't have anything to do with the article, except that right now, what I'm hearing when I read this article is basically think of the left's attempt to tax the rich and redistribute that wealth to the poor, and then the weaponization of the FBI and the DOJ going after political rivals. So the second article I want to read from is from the factsanddetails.com website, and the title of this report was Vietnam After the Vietnam War. And I'll read here, quoting here. Vietnam was formally reunited under communist rule in July 1976. After the Vietnam War, Vietnam became isolated from the world and ranked for many years as one of the world's poorest nations. Even though it sat on some of the richest agricultural land in the world, it had difficulty feeding itself. David Lamb wrote in the Los Angeles Times, quote, "It is revolutionary zeal. The party collectivized farms without incentives. Productivity went down, and Vietnam became a rice importer. The party confiscated property and wealth. Overnight, millionaires became paupers. Children of South Vietnamese soldiers were denied access to the best colleges and good jobs, and the spirit of reconciliation withered. Newspapers disappeared, movie theaters closed, bank safe deposit boxes were sealed. Ordinary Vietnamese were forbidden to have contact with foreigners. More than 400,000 South Vietnamese were sent off to re-education camps, some to languish for years." And that was from David Lamb, Los Angeles Times article dated April 30th of 2005. From all indications, social changes in Vietnam occurred more through coercion than volition. And again, this is my take. The radical views of society being forced into everyday life, and you are a hate-filled bigot if you voice any type of opinion of what's going on in today's America. So getting back to the article here, for many, the time spent in the re-education camps consisted mainly of enduring long lectures about Marxism and little more than that. One man told the Los Angeles Times, "We'd get lectures in the morning, then in the afternoon we'd write self-criticism, but they didn't want you to express any opinions, raise any questions. You could call it quite insulting intellectually." A guard who worked at one of the camps said, "We don't kill you or knock people down. We just try to persuade them on how to make progress and become a good people," obviously in the eyes of the communists. Nguyen Hu Co, a major general in the South Vietnamese army, told the Los Angeles Times he remembered raising vegetables, cutting firewood, and enduring interminable political lectures during his 12 years in a re-education camp. He's quoting here, "I was in the camp with 45 other generals, and the cadre asked us again and again to understand a communist regime compared with a capitalist regime. Frankly, I couldn't agree with that communism was better than capitalism, but I could not say that. So I just listened and kept quiet." Again, my take is in today's world, people who stand by their beliefs or comments are attacked incessantly if it goes counter to what the current narrative is. And usually that goes along with calls for censorship or deplatforming or professional character assassination. So very, very interesting there. All right, so back to Ben. He and his families experienced firsthand what happens when a government of centralized control takes over a society. And in the case of Vietnam, the communist government of North Vietnam. And I'm not even going to go into the horrific changes that occurred in neighboring Cambodia when Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge took over there. Now, obviously, and thank God, our situation here in the United States is not nearly as catastrophic, but you can see very unsettling trends happening that, if allowed to go unchallenged, who knows where it could take us. And I think that was kind of what Ben was alluding to. So what has he noticed here that makes him believe that the U.S. is on a wrong and dangerous path? He used examples of the current government overreach in several areas and various cultural movements. So let's start with government overreach and the degradation of personal freedoms. Now, you can say government has been growing more powerful for a long period of time, but really, in my view, it really kicked into high gear after 9/11. You may remember Congress passed the sweeping Patriot Act with very little debate or opposition. After all, could you imagine the balls it would have taken to have some politicians stand up opposed to this legislation after what had just happened? Now, obviously, to their credit, some actually did, but their voices were thoroughly drowned out. The Department of Homeland Security was born of this act. When it first appeared on the scene, its primary focus was going after foreign terrorists in order to guard against another 9/11 type of catastrophe. And that seemed noble enough mission. Now, they were given vast powers, which allowed them in some cases to do away with the personal civil liberties of their targets. Well, that department, and of course there are others, but DHS will suffice here for my point, has grown exponentially since its inception. The creeping consolidation of government power is a hallmark of tyrannical governments focused on centralized top-down control. Another characteristic of these types of out-of-control governments is the changing of language to help justify their power grab. As an example, right after the towers fell, what was considered a terrorist, right? It was a non-state actor dead set against everything the United States power stood for, and by extension, our society and our way of life. Most people, if asked back then, would have said that a terrorist most likely looked exactly like Osama bin Laden, even though that obviously is a gross generalization. So back to today, and what is the government and its media propagandists trying to tell us about who is a terrorist? The far right, white nationalist domestic terrorists. And they've tried very hard for at least since 2016, and we all know what happened then, to convince the public that these homegrown domestic terrorists are more of a danger to our way of life than the foreign terrorists are. And that includes many of the bad actors that are on our current terror watch list. So the establishment has gone even further, and for the most part have repeated the narrative and tried to associate anyone on the right, anyone who has supported Donald Trump is automatically lumped in with those reprehensible far-right fringe groups, insinuating that Donald Trump supporters are the real terrorists and more of a threat to the United States. So that back to my point about government overreach. Let me read some excerpts from Kentucky Senator Rand Paul's recent questioning of DHS Director Alejandro Mayorkas over the department's recent push to jump on the censorship bandwagon against their own citizens, all in the name of stopping disinformation. Now, keep in mind that the DOJ and the FBI have also been outed as conspiring with social media to stamp out opposing opinions by calling it disinformation as well. And those two are accused of actually flat out censorship of information. This hearing occurred just recently, and Senator Paul's comments come from an article which quoted his statements. So the article's titled, "Rand Paul Tells DHS Head That Agency's Practices Are Like Something Out of Stalin's Russia." And this is by Steve Watson of InfoWars, and it was on April 19th. So, quoting the article here, Senator Rand Paul confronted the head of the Department of Homeland Security Tuesday during a hearing, asking him why some of the agency's practices are akin to those of authoritarian regimes. Rand Paul said, DHS even put out a video encouraging children to report their own family members to Facebook for disinformation if they challenged U.S. government narratives on COVID-19. Does that not sound like something out of 1984 or out of Stalin's Russia? In his opening remarks, Paul noted, in the 20 years since its creation, the Department of Homeland Security has departed from its original mission and used its expansive authorities and funding to impede on the rights of American citizens. The senator continues, what should terrify every American is that the full extent of DHS's abuse of its power against its own citizens is still largely unknown. The public is only recently learning the degree to which the department's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the CISA, was employed to surveil and censor American citizens' social media for what it concluded to be misinformation and disinformation. Paul continued, adding, statements about COVID that are now supported by evidence were flagged as disinformation. Statements including my own that were once labeled by our government as disinformation. Such as the efficacy of masks, naturally acquired immunity, and the origins of the COVID-19 are now supported by evidence. Paul emphasized that in 2021, DHS even put out a video encouraging children to report on their own family members, like I just mentioned. And then continuing on here, in reality, the most significant source of disinformation during the pandemic with the most influence and greatest impact on people's lives was the U.S. government. And there's a lot of evidence to support that statement he just made. Instead of focusing on real threats, the DHS was internally strategizing on how it can expand social media censorship of Americans using third-party nonprofits as, in the words of a CISA official, a clearinghouse for information to avoid the appearance of government propaganda. The senator continued. A report published last month by Brennan Center for Justice found at least 12 overlapping DHS programs for tracking what Americans are saying online. It found that the department's programs have veered from its counterterrorism mission into tracking social and political movements and monitoring First Amendment protected activity of American citizens. The report concluded that overbroad mandates, flimsy safeguards, and fragmented oversight have allowed overreach and abuses to proliferate across DHS intelligence programs. This kind of abuse of power should terrify all of us, regardless of which side of the aisle you are on, Paul emphasized, adding, even worse, it is all taking place while the department is failing miserably at one of its core responsibilities, securing our border. Congress cannot continue to provide more funding and responsibilities to an agency that so clearly misunderstands its statutory authorities and purpose. And again, like I said, the FBI and the DOJ have also been called out for overstepping their authority and just generally conducting un-American activities against their own citizens. So now there are also social trends that are also very troubling. And that includes the previously mentioned desire to want to have children spying on their parents and reporting to the police if they are straying from the official sanctioned narrative. Thankfully, those desires from the left are just that, and nothing has come of it because of the public backlash. But the fact that they are thinking in those terms should worry everyone. And the fact that they actually put out a video should worry everybody. The current woke trends of the cancel culture, doxing, and deplatforming opposite viewpoints are so dangerous to our way of life here in the United States. Just think of the most recent reactions to Tucker Carlson being forced off of Fox News. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez couldn't even help herself and couldn't help but tell the truth about what the left wants when she said that deplatforming works and she thinks that's a good thing. Absolutely no counter argument to the official government narrative will be allowed, meaning official pressure to remove alternate views works to silence those voices. There were also government officials openly calling for his ouster from Fox News, even some in the Republican leadership, and they were doing it from the floor of the Capitol. That just goes to show, in my view, he was getting way too close to telling the public the truth about what is happening in our government. The attempt to silence any dissenting views is in a way like a re-education camp. You will only know what we dictate you should know. That is absolutely anathema to our free society. Now, thankfully, in my opinion, I think Tucker Carlson is so popular that his millions of followers will follow him wherever he ends up working, and which I'm sure will be pretty soon. In true libertarian fashion, he was actually speaking truth to power and was letting too much out there, and the power had to shut him down. That's just how I look at this. Again, they really didn't shut down anything, as I think he'll be back. And in the meantime, Fox is paying dearly for that move in terms of their ratings and viewership. So my take is this hyperbolic rhetoric demonizing anyone with a different view is there to silence and scare people into adherence. Now, just think, as an example, what the radical LGBTQ movement is doing. Anyone who opposes that narrative is immediately accused of being full of hate and inciting violence and injury. And that even includes lesbian activists who are calling out their radical views. Again, using the concept of changing the meaning of words, now alternate opinions are considered violence. Literally, words are violence. That in turn allows the supposed victim group to justify actually acting violently, as evidenced by what just happened recently with Riley Gaines after a recent appearance she made. So thankfully, in my view, a silent majority is speaking up. And you see this in the massive crash of Anheuser-Busch's value after their latest Bud Light ad campaign. Right now, anybody who speaks out against that ad campaign is considered a hate monger. And you will see just how counterproductive that view of, if you don't go along with the narrative, you are filled with hate. The vast majority of people are not like that and are turned off by being lectured that they are. I don't think you can do that and call millions of people homophobic, misogynistic, xenophobic, and any other phobic title you want because they've stopped drinking Bud Light in protest. Based on the massive 17% drop in sales, that is a huge swath of the population. The left will try to destroy anyone who deviates from their narrative. Just think about what they've tried to do to independent investigative journalists Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald. And also, who remembers the former transgender Navy SEAL Chris Beck, who transitioned back to being a man? Not many, because once that happened, they completely kicked him to the curb. So why do I bring up these few examples, and how do they relate to what my Vietnamese friend is worried about? Um, are we going to become like Vietnam when the communist North took over the whole country in 1975 and almost overnight destroyed any vestiges of Western governmental, social, and cultural influence? No. That happened so quickly, and the South, in my view, was too weak to withstand that onslaught. However, government overreach has been happening since 9/11, with both sides of the aisle being guilty of it. The radical progressive cultural changes have happened in a lot shorter period of time, in my view, and it's coming from only one side. What gained a lot of ground during the Obama administration was stopped or stalled during the Trump presidency, only to be reinstated in overdrive currently with a radically left-leaning Biden Oval Office. So I believe this is how it starts. The boiling of the frog analogy. If opposing viewpoints are silenced and one narrative is allowed to dominate, then of course the end state could look something like Vietnam after 1975. A free society needs to be able to have opposing viewpoints expressed. And just because one has an opposing viewpoint doesn't mean they are a hateful bigot. It just means that they don't see the world the same way. And there is no problem with that. History is filled with examples of situations like what happened in Vietnam after the war ended. Re-education camps, loss of liberties and property, secret police monitoring everything, and worse. It's not that far off base to think that that could happen again. All right, so hopefully that wasn't too far over the top or apocalyptic. I'm convinced that that won't be our future as long as people inform themselves about what is really going on and are very skeptical of the narratives being pushed by those in power. And most importantly, have the courage to express those opinions in a civil way, which I believe the vast majority of citizens still want to do. Okay, so that's my take on the comment that my friend made to me recently. I found it very interesting and a lot of food for thought, especially coming from somebody who's seen what the exact opposite of the United States is. So I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully they'll get the conversation going. And in the meantime, if you're in the military, the police departments, fire departments, or first responders, if that's you out there, thank you very much for your service. Stay safe. This is the Rain Man. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for watching Rain Man's Take, observations on the world we live in. If you like the content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. You can also follow Rain Man's Take on Instagram at Rain Man's Take. Also, check out our website at www.rainmanstakepodcast.com and send your comments to rainmanstake@gmail.com. Keep an eye out for future podcasts, which will be coming out every Thursday at 5 p.m. West Coast time.